As we speak, hundreds of thousands of recent high school graduates are packing up boxes of clothes and computers and heading off to the university of their choice. And most of them are saying, "Hello, college, goodbye, God." In fact, that's what many of us have said throughout our lives when we went off to college. Hello, college, goodbye, God. Of course, some people find God in college. Some people find religion. Many of you know, obviously, of Condoleezza Rice, who grew up right here, and former provost at Stanford, former Secretary of State, who loves to tell the story about her granddaddy Rice, who was working on a tenant farmer's land and wanted to go to college to get what he called some book learning, and found that Stillman College would take a person like him. And he went, he saved up some money and went, and he only lasted 1 year because he ran out of money. But he looked around and found out some others were actually continuing on, and he went to the school authorities and said, "How can this be? What's going on?" And they said, "Well, they have scholarship." He said, "Well, how do you get a scholarship?" And they said, "Well, if you decide to become a Presbyterian minister, we will pay for the rest of your education." He said, "You know, that's just what I had in mind." I got the call. Some people find religion in college, but many of us don't. Many of us who are older didn't. And we can't decry the lack of faith of college students because we were pretty much the same. Things aren't all that different, are they? And yet, some things are very different. Consider these facts. Those who are going off to college this fall were born, if you do the math, roughly around 1997, which means that they probably really don't know much about a typewriter, a black and white TV, a floppy disk. They can't imagine life without Facebook, Twitter, smartphones, and tablets. They have no memory of the Cold War or the breakup of the Soviet Union. Vietnam is ancient history to them because their century is the 21st century. The truth is, we don't remember much before the age of 4, and so their memory is the 21st, their personal memory is the 21st century. And in fact, they wonder who we're talking about when we mention Johnny Carson and J.R. They're confused by all this. In fact, they giggle when we tell them that there was a time when we actually lived without remote controls. They just can't believe that that's the case. When our younger son, David, was in elementary school, and we lived in Dallas, and the Dallas Cowboys were a big thing there, obviously still are. I saw him getting ready for his first day of second grade, and he had this enormous backpack on his back, and it was loaded down. And I said, "David, you're in second grade. What's in your back?" He said, "Oh, those are books." Books in second grade? I said, "When I was in second grade, all I carried to school was my Roy Rogers lunch pail." And he said, "Who's Roy Rogers?" And I said, "He was a cowboy." And he said, "What position did he play?" So you see, things are different now. And yet, in many ways, they're still the same. Same anxieties about making it in school, about choosing a major, and perhaps finding a mate. Same anxieties about what's going to happen in my life. Same this, same that. And yet, those of us who went to college in the 60s know how different things really are. We moved from the Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best world, which William Sloane Coffin once described in an op-ed piece of the New York Times as the bland leading the bland. We moved from that era into a wild and raucous whole period of experimental protest and all kinds of problems that we moved into. Some people called this the best of times. Some people called it the worst of times. Many of us moved from Judaism to Christianity, and we moved to a kind of gleeful secularism and agnostic hedonism. We moved into a totally different period. Some of us found solace in Harvey Cox's Secular City. We lived in a totally different world. And yet, some of us just use Sunday morning to sleep it off. And in many ways, then, that world is very similar to this one. We said, hello college, goodbye God. We said the same thing in that period. So things really haven't changed all that much, and yet they are still the same. And because of that, I want to say it's not all bad that we say hello college, goodbye God, because there are two specific reasons we need to say hello college and goodbye God. And the first one is this: some of us have too much of God when we grow up. We got too much. Maybe it's better to say we had too much religion when we were growing up. We were holier than thou when we went to college, like the Pharisees that Jesus had to confront in the Gospels. We experienced college in a way that we were going to take it on. We were going to convert everyone. We were clutching our Bibles like Frank on the reruns of MASH. We were ready for everyone. When I was in college at the University of Tulsa, they called those of us who were religion and philosophy majors Bible jocks. That's literally what they called us. But we couldn't even hold a candle to the parachurch groups who were fanatics. I mean, they would sit outside my door and pray that I wouldn't go to hell because I wouldn't come to their meetings. And I was going into the ministry. I thought, go pick on some real sinners. I mean, this is crazy, Timothy had to deal with these kind of legalists in Ephesus. They called themselves law professors. They were law teachers. They believed they knew everything there was to know about God. They knew God intimately and completely, and they were right. Their view of God was right, and yours was wrong, and you just better not question anything they said. Let me give you an example. When you are on a plane and someone sitting next to you finds out that you're a president of a seminary, which I was for the last 10 years, then they start asking you all kinds of religious questions. And I just want to read my magazine, just take a nap or something. No, we have these religious questions we want to ask you. And I got all kinds. Sometimes I would get them in email. Here's one that I got in email once. It said, hey, do Protestants believe that Catholics and Orthodox are going to hell because of their faith? Now, far be it from me to answer for all Presbyterians, much less all Protestants, but the kind of answer I would give is some Protestants may believe that Catholics and Orthodox are going to hell, but not all of us do. Thankfully, not all of us do. Who's going to heaven and who's going to hell is God's business. It's God's business, not ours. Now, Timothy had people like that in his Ephesus church, and that's part of what Paul's talking about in the text we just read a few moments ago. He had to deal with people, legalists, who knew so exactly about the furniture of heaven and the temperature of hell. They knew everything. And some people need to leave that kind of God behind when they go to college. Maybe they've had religion crammed down their throats, thankfully, hopefully not in a church like this, but in some places that's the case. And they need to let that God go. I mean, I have seen many recovering fundamentalists who come back to church after years away because they couldn't handle the scars from religion that they had because their God that they had learned growing up was an angry and vengeful God. Only a giant frown in the sky. In the 1880s, a young boy tossed and turned all night, lest in dying he might go to hell, because that's what he was taught. And his mother, out of patience with the religious training that put these kinds of apparitions in his mind, tried in vain to comfort her young son. 50 years later, that boy, Harry Emerson Fosdick, stood before the Riverside Church in New York City and tried to comfort them. Sometimes when your God is an angry, vengeful God, you need to say goodbye to that God. And I've been reading the wonderful biography on our founding pastor, Henry Edmonds, and he is making that same point over and over again in his sermons and his message to the congregation. The God you need to worship is a loving God. So the first reason to say goodbye to God when you go to college is you're saying goodbye to an angry and vengeful God. The second reason is a very interesting one. It means that you should question everything you learn in college and test it. In fact, you need to build your own faith on your own experience and not just try to inherit the faith that you got from your parents. There are false teachers that you will run into, says Paul, false people giving you all kinds of endless myths and genealogies. And you need to question, you need to test everything. Half of college is learning how to think for yourself anyway. So you need to learn how to test, you need to learn how to question. Paul probably has in mind here the book of Jubilees, 2nd century BC, legendary accretions on the Old Testament. They're somewhat akin to our patriotic American legends like George Washington and the cherry tree. And Paul says, test these ideas. Epictetus in his dissertation says, do you take Homer and his tales as an authority for everything? You need to test these things. You need to question them. And you also, I will say to those who are going to college, you need to question even what your parents say. Now, I realize I'm on dangerous ground when I say that. The truth is I'm preaching to the choir because teenagers question their parents all the time anyway. The reason you need to question them is that their ideas will stand the test of time if they're right. It's the Gamaliel test. You can find it in Acts 5, where the people are saying that we need to get rid of these Christians, and Gamaliel says, no, if their ideas are right, then we will be fighting against God. We'll just let it go and see. So it's okay to question your parents on certain ideas and think about them. Why? Because you are trying to hammer out your own faith on the anvil of your own experience. I had to go through this in college. I remember when I was a religion and philosophy major, the business major said, why are you wasting your time on all that religious stuff? I mean, money is all that really counts in our world today. Why would you waste your time on religion? And I didn't have an answer for them. I was a preacher's kid, but I had only been living on an inherited faith. And I was living with my grandmother Corey for 3 of the 4 years of college, the woman I mentioned in a sermon back in June. And one night I just started questioning everything and saying, what is all this God stuff? And once I resuscitated her, she said, oh my gosh, your parents are going to think I've ruined you. And I went through what William James calls a religious experience, where one day I was praying and nothing seemed to work, and the next day I felt the amazing presence of God filling my whole life. And that was kind of a beginning for me right there in college. You can't live your whole life on an inherited faith. You need to say goodbye and move on and hammer out that faith on the anvil of your own experience. And part of that means saying hello, complexity and perplexity and ambiguity, and goodbye, hard and fast, easy answers and simplicity. College is a place where you stretch and grow in your faith. It's a place where you begin to say, as Jesus did in the temple, I'm going to question some things here. I mean, and Paul says to Timothy, don't let them despise your youth. Go ahead and ask hard questions. Begin to put your faith to the test by not just coasting along, but actually asking hard questions and learning how to deal with challenges in a very secular, this is a post-Christendom secular world in which we live, and you have to be able to know what you really believe. I'll just give you an example. When I went to graduate school at the University of Pittsburgh, began to work on my PhD in political rhetoric and communication, every single member of that faculty was an atheist. Well, there was one recovering Lutheran, and he was sort of religious, but most of them were either agnostic or atheist. And here I had come from being a preacher's kid, growing up in the manse, a church home, go to church every single Sunday, majored in religion, philosophy, and Greek in college, worked hard on Bible and theology in 3 years of seminary, and now for the first time in my life, I was thrown out of the womb of the church into a place where, well, Richard Newhouse calls it the naked public square, where this public arena where we actually studied Billy Graham and Adolf Hitler side by side as examples of mass persuasion. And we saw the similarities, and from a purely objective rhetorical perspective, and we began to think more clearly about everything. We studied the rhetoric of the sciences and the rhetoric of the social sciences, Thomas J. Kuhn's rhetoric of scientific revolutions. We studied presidential rhetoric, classical rhetoric, and they were constantly challenging me in my faith, and I had to begin to say goodbye to a warm and fuzzy saccharine God and say hello to a God who tested my faith, a God who loved me, but a God who understood me in all my faults and foibles. I love how Paul is speaking now to this younger servant, encouraging him, trying to shepherd him along in his faith, just as I have spent my whole life encouraging seminary students and candidates for ministry and many younger people. I love how Timothy's name literally in Greek means the one who honors God. Timao, I honor. Theos, God. That's what we're all called to be, aren't we? We are called to be ones who honor God every single day of our lives. So for those who are going off to college this day and this fall, I hope that you will honor God. And when you receive that diploma, as you will someday, I hope you can say with confidence, goodbye college, hello God. To this God be all honor and blessing and glory and praise from this day forth and forevermore. God bless you all.